Today we're going to be making this very drink right here. So do me a favor and let's carry out a little experiment. So read this in your head or out loud and have a little think about it. So if you said Pink Bourbon Renewal, I think you're probably more of a coffee person, whereas if you said Pink Bourbon Renewal, you're probably more of a cocktail person. So either way, you're in the right place. This channel is all about coffee and cocktails. If you like both, you're probably conflicted as to what this drink's even called, just like I am. Pink Bourbon Renewal, Pink Bourbon Renewal, whichever one it is, we're gonna make it today. So let's get started. So to all of my coffee friends out there, you'll have probably heard of the Pink Bourbon variety recently. It's become very popular, and to the point it's even been used in the World Barista Championship finals. So to those of you not familiar with coffee varieties, they exist, which is quite interesting. And if you think of other things like apples, things like grapes, you'll have heard of the Bourbon variety of apple, Cox variety, Granny Smith. You'll have heard of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, all these different varieties within these fruits, and coffee's no different. So the variety you pick is gonna have a big influence on the flavor of the cup, and what we're gonna do today is really celebrate the Pink Bourbon variety in a delicious cocktail, which is what we do here. So before we talk about what Pink Bourbon is, I think it's really important that we talk about what it isn't. So it's definitely not an aged spirit coming out of the USA, made from primarily corn base. And even more interestingly, it's probably not even a Bourbon variety at all. So the original story behind the Pink Bourbon was that there were yellow Bourbon varieties, red Bourbon growing, and the pink was growing amongst it, had this kind of pinkish hue, which was assumed to be a hybrid between the two. But in an article I'll link below, this has been pretty strongly disproven, and it's much more likely that the Pink Bourbon isn't a Bourbon at all. It's more likely to be an Ethiopian landrace variety. So we're not talking about bourbon here, we're almost definitely not talking about even a Bourbon variety, but what are we talking about? So the Pink Bourbon variety is essentially one of the most vividly, strongly flavored coffees I've ever tried, has really distinct flavor characteristics, and regardless of where it grows, who it's produced by, or even the processing method, I pretty much always find really vivid flavors of grapefruit, rhubarb, and a subtle floral note in there as well. So whichever one you choose, you're probably gonna have some combination of these flavors. And what we're gonna do today is find a drink which really builds upon these and celebrates those amazing flavors of the Pink Bourbon. To do this, we're going to use a template of a drink called a Bourbon Renewal, which is a cocktail invented in the early 2000s by Jeffrey Morgenthaler, very iconic bartender, has had a lot of influence on the industry. And essentially what we're looking at here is 60 mils of bourbon whiskey, 30 mils of freshly squeezed lemon juice, 15 mils of creme de cassis, which is a blackberry liqueur, between 5 and 15 mils of a 2-to-1 sugar syrup, I'm using a Monin syrup, and then just 1 dash of aromatic bitters, shaken up hard and served over a big rock of ice with a lemon slice garnish. It's a really delicious drink, and to me it lands somewhere between a very strong whiskey sour, bearing in mind it is pretty boozy with 60 mils of bourbon and 15 mils of your liqueur, and kind of like a bramble as well, which has gin, kind of berry fruit flavors in there, and that sweet and sour base. But don't get me wrong, this drink's very much a booze-forward drink. Bourbon's definitely the hero here, that sweet and sour and fruitiness just kind of underpinning it. So strong whiskey sour, bramble. I'll link how to make these at the end in our 50 video essential cocktail course, but it's a really delicious hybrid. I love it. I think it's a really good drink for a lot of people. So give that a try. Very autumnal as well, so it's gonna be topical quite soon. But what we're gonna do is take this base, change some of the ingredients out, and also use a brand new technique to introduce coffee, which is very exciting. So stick around and we're gonna make the Pink Bourbon Renewal, or the Pink Bourbon Renewal, whichever one you want. So for our Pink Bourbon Renewal, Pink Bourbon Renewal, whichever way you look at it, we've actually got a really interesting way of adding the coffee here. So the Pink Bourbon is, as I said, a very vivid coffee, very distinctive, grapefruit, rhubarb florals. This particular version is a naturally processed coffee, comes from my friends at The Underdog, and they taste strawberry, hibiscus, and bergamot, which are pretty typical for a Pink Bourbon. It's a really delicious coffee, but as with all the Pink Bourbons I've ever tried, not one I'd necessarily want to drink every single day because it is so intense and so kind of punchy. When I'm brewing this, I tend to brew it a little bit weaker than I usually would, so maybe a 1 to 3 espresso. So if I'm using 20 grams of coffee, I'll pull a 60 gram yield, which is a little bit longer than usual. If I'm making a filter brew, I might go for maybe 55 grams per litre, rather than 60 to 65, which I usually start with. And the reason for that is I just want to bring down those kind of very intense flavors, just to round out the cup a little bit. And in this drink, we're adding it in a completely, I think, brand new way that I've never seen anyone introduce coffee to cocktails, which is quite exciting. So here I've got 10 grams of our Pink Bourbon. This is going to go straight into our shaker. This is potentially going to seem a little bit weird, but you have to trust me, it works so, so well. So here I've got a muddler, but you could also use a rolling pin. We're just going to crush this, not to grind it up really fine, just to kind of break the beans so they can allow a little bit of flavor into the final drink. And because this has such big flavors, you don't need loads in there. 10 grams is fine, lightly crushed is fine. So we're gonna do that now, which is gonna be a little bit noisy. So you only wanna crush it for maybe 10 seconds. And you wanna make sure all the beans are broken, but not like really finely ground. So, I don't know if you can see that on the overhead camera, but it's kind of loosely broken, not like crazy fine. And don't be scared of this. We're gonna pass it through a fine strainer like this, so you will not taste or feel any of the kind of fine seeping through. It just gives loads of coffee flavor. So 10 grams of lightly crushed beans. We're gonna go in with pretty much the same template as we had before, starting with 60 mils of our bourbon whiskey. And this is Buffalo Trace, quite a sweet whiskey, a little bit of kind of butterscotch in there. I'm a big fan of this. Works very well in a whiskey sour, which is what this drink kind of has a lot in common with. And then for our acidity, we're actually gonna go with grapefruit juice. So whereas before we had our 30 mils of lemon juice, I'm going with 30 mils of pink grapefruit juice. And this ties in with that really nice pink grapefruit flavor we find in the coffee. Pretty much every time I've tried it, it's been there, and it's a really distinctive characteristic. So one thing to bear in mind when it comes to grapefruit juice, this is a little bit less acidic and a little bit less sharp than lemon juice. So with our sweeteners, we can get away with adding a little bit less to make sure the drink stays balanced. And that also allows the coffee to really kind of shine at the front of the drink, along with the bourbon, which this drink's all about. So before we had cassis as our liqueur, this time we're going with Chinola passion fruit liqueur, and I'm going with 7.5 mils. And the reason for this, a lot of pink bourbon coffees, particularly when they have like an advanced processing method, are gonna have really nice kind of tropical fruit flavors. This one definitely does. A lot of the other pink bourbons I've tried also have that tropical fruit. So this is gonna bring that out. And then finally, in terms of sweetness, again, 7.5 mils of a homemade hibiscus syrup. And this is gonna bring through those really nice floral notes, a little bit of a kind of red fruit flavor in there as well. And it just brings the sweetness to balance out our grapefruit juice. This is really easy to make. Just combine 10 grams of dried hibiscus, something like a hibiscus tea or an infusion, with 100 grams of boiling water. Leave that to infuse for around about 5 minutes. And while it's still hot, add 100 grams of golden castor sugar. Mix that together, pass it through a fine strainer, and you're left with this delicious hibiscus syrup. We're gonna stick again with just our 1 dash of aromatic bitters. And to be honest, I was a little bit skeptical about this. I didn't think 1 dash of bitters was gonna make any difference. But when I tasted the original Bourbon Renewal, and when I made this version, it does actually bring through a really nice cloviness, a very subtle spice note, which kind of takes it into that autumnal vibe. This has some really fruity, tropical flavors as well, so it's still quite summery, but it does make a big difference, so don't omit that. And then we're gonna give this a good shake over ice. So don't overdo the shake, you just want to kind of lightly dilute the drink and bring it all together. And then we're going to fine strain this over a big rock of ice in a frozen glass. We're going to garnish with some charred grapefruit, which really brings out the aromas of the grapefruit and ties in with the coffee and the bourbon nicely. And there we have the Pink Bourbon or Bourbon Renewal. All right, cheers everybody. The Pink Bourbon or Bourbon Renewal. When I first tried this drink, it really made me smile because it really does taste like a perfect hybrid between a Pink Bourbon and the Bourbon Renewal. So up front, you've got the bourbon coming through, really vivid coffee flavors, and everything I think I know about a Pink Bourbon is basically in this drink. So that rhubarb flavor we didn't need to add because the coffee's got such strong rhubarb flavors. The pink grapefruit, very clear. Bourbon's in there as well, giving a nice kind of nuttiness and roundness to the drink. We've got the florals coming from the hibiscus and also the coffee. We've got the tropical fruit flavors in there coming from the passion fruit. I think it's a really nice balance between acidity from the grapefruit, sweetness from the other ingredients, and a little bit of bitterness in there. And everything just plays together really nicely. And actually it really tastes like a cup of Pink Bourbon, which is kind of strange. So I kind of know what you're thinking. You're worried about these grounds in the cup. They're very fine. I promise you can't taste them, you can't feel them. They've been through that fine strainer, so they are so fine. And when you sip the drink, you wouldn't even know they're there. So, at the start of the video, I asked you whether you're a coffee person or whether you're a cocktail person, indirectly. What you can do now is comment below. I'm a coffee person, I'm a cocktail person, so I can understand who's out there, your backgrounds, and that'll really help the future. If you enjoy this kind of drink, make sure you subscribe to the channel by clicking here. And if you want to see the two drinks that I think this really reminds me of, I'll put the whiskey sour for you to watch here and the bramble for you to watch here. So I'm going to keep going back to this. I'm really, really happy with this, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.